6 o'clock. Welcome to the January 27th meeting of the Select Board. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So this meeting is being recorded and broadcast on ECAT. It's also hybrid, so we have Zoom capabilities. If people are on the Zoom platform and they have a question, please put it into the Q&A. And remember to put your name and your street address for our minutes. Sean will monitor that and let us know if there's questions. And we do have Jen Stacy is coming in remote, not feeling well today, so we really appreciate you being there for us, Jen. And Select Board Member Lamb is also out sick today. And so myself, Dottie Fulgenetti, and we've got
Craig Barger.
So we do have a quorum. Select Board Member Stebbins is going to try to Zoom in. He's traveling, but we have a quorum for now. So we will just jump in and get started here. The first item that we have on the agenda is one-day liquor license for Stonehill College WBB alumni game reception at the Martin Auditorium, 320 Washington Street, February 8th, 2025, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. The snow date is February 9th, and there is not a police detail required for this. Any questions?
No.
Do you want to make a motion, Craig?
Yeah, I move to approve the one-day liquor license for Stonehill College WBB alumni game reception at the Martin Auditorium, 320 Washington Street on February 8th, 2025, from 5 to 9 p.m. with a snow date of February 9th.
Okay.
Second.
That's Barger and Stacy, and this will be a roll call vote. We'll start with you, Jen.
Stacy, yes.
Fulgenetti, yes?
Barger, yes.
Okay. Next, acceptance of a resignation, Thomas Lowald from the Public Spaces Committee with a term expiring June 30th, 2025. We'd like to thank Thomas for his time on that committee and accept his resignation with regret. Would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I move to accept the resignation of Thomas Lewald from the Public Spaces Committee with a term expiring June 30th of 2025.
Second.
That's Barger and Stacy with a roll call vote.
Stacy Lowald.
Fulgenetti Lowald.
Barger Lowald.
All right. Also acceptance of a resignation, Lynn Cleveland from the Council on Aging with a term expiring June 30th, 2025.
So I move to accept the resignation of Lynn Cleveland from the Council on Aging with a term expiring June 30th, 2025.
Second.
That's Barger and Stacy.
Stacy Cleveland.
Fulgenetti Cleveland.
Barger Cleveland.
All right. Now we have an appointment to the Council on Aging. This is contested. We have two people that have applied, Linda Palucci and Nancy, did I have the right name here? Nancy Weiner. So I'm just going to read off their...
Dottie, I do believe one of the applicants is here.
Where are they?
I believe they're in the hallway.
Oh, okay.
We'll make sure they're coming.
Well, before they come in, let me just read the description of the Council on Aging.
Linda, okay.
Oh, one
Linda's
second.
here.
The Easton Council on Aging is the town department that provides or coordinates programs to meet the needs of Easton residents aged 60 or older. Services are provided with funding from municipal taxes, state and federal grants, along with private donations and volunteer services. Because of this support, many of the programs are offered free or at a nominal charge to our elderly residents. The Easton Council on Aging publishes a monthly newsletter, The Coordinator, which is distributed throughout the town and is mailed or emailed to Easton elderly and interested residents upon request. This newsletter includes information on programs and recreational activities, as well as important topical information for seniors. So, hi, how are you? Good. So we have two applicants, and you're Linda. Okay. Linda, if you want to come up to the table. And just very quickly tell us a little bit about yourself and why you want to be on this position.
Okay. Obviously, because I'm one of the senior people in the community, so I'm always concerned about, what's being offered and how well informed the community, the senior community is, and what resources are available to them, especially in these times. Things change constantly, and there's a lot of information and not a lot of people over. I know we cover, 50 and over, but people much older than that aren't always comfortable with the technology, and so we have to do different venues to reach people and be able to keep them informed. I also work for the Community Emergency Response Team, so I have provided services for the elders. During COVID, we accompanied the paramedics from the fire team. We went to all the elderly housing. We stayed with people for the 15 minutes after the COVID vaccine was administered and just spent some time with that particular population. We also have provided supplies for them at the elderly housing in order to run shelters, because we normally run a shelter at the Richardson School, and that's where all of our volunteers are based. So we are used to working with that community. I work part-time, very part-time. I work about 27 to 30 hours a month for the Medical Reserve Corps. And I know that with at least one of our large shelters, that we did bring in some medical reserve people. I have both medical and non-medical personnel on my volunteer staff. So we have used them before. Bristol, Norfolk does not cover the town of Easton. That is covered by Taunton. But because I come from Easton and I work in that particular region, I have gotten volunteers from Easton, and they are on the Bristol, Norfolk. So there's an interchange there. Recently, I've also been in touch with Kristen Kennedy, because there is a partnership of towns that includes Easton. That's a public health collaborative. And we just made partners with them to provide certain services. We've also gotten a recent memorandum of agreement with the Red Cross. So we're going to be providing those kinds of services. We're going to be part of the board. So we will indirectly be working with Easton also. So we don't really care too much about the boundaries. And we have actually one sort of regional director that covers different sections of the MRC. So we work together all the time. Okay. So I'm very attuned to the elderly. My degree was in psychology. I was a licensed certified social worker. When I first moved to Easton 45 plus years ago, I used to work at the Easton Lincoln Nursing Home. And I worked there, and from there I started to do some consulting work with other nursing homes in the Boston area. I did that for a while. I was a social worker with the state. I screened elderly people at home, assessed their needs, and we did some screenings for nursing home placements. I worked on a nurse social worker team. I'm very used to working with nurses. In fact, I work with a nurse right now with the MRC. So I have a lot of experience with elderly. When I first moved up here, before I got a real job, I used to teach activities in nursing homes. And, I'm an artist in my own right, and I was part of the gallery. And I was actually on the Cultural Council for 3 terms, two terms, one following the other, took the break that I needed to take, and then served another term. So I know all the trainings and the ethics and the rules, regulations. So I understand that we are under confines with which to work.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right.
Any questions at all?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, and the other candidate, Nancy Weiner, is not able to be here tonight. She's a retired office manager at the Sharon Adult Center Council on Aging. She retired a few years ago after working 32 years as an office manager / transportation coordinator for the Town of Sharon Adult Center / Council on Aging. She says she believes that based on her experiences and expertise acquired from her tenure at the Adult Center, she could be a positive presence on the Easton COA board. She graduated from Stonehill College with a BA in sociology and a certificate in gerontology. She says, not only do I have the knowledge in programming and social services for knowledge of programming and social services for seniors, she would also bring to the table a familiarity with the workings of a town government. So this is, once again, a real challenge because we have two really great candidates, and they both have, similar experience. I think that Nancy has worked with the Council on Aging directly before. What are your thoughts, Craig?
Yeah, no, I like the fact that she's worked for 32 years with the Council on Aging, so she understands what it's all about, albeit in a different town, but similar requirements, et cetera, and expectations. So I would recommend that we go with Nancy Weiner this time around.
Yeah, I think the transportation part of it is really important as well. What about you, Jen? Any comments?
I'm going to go differently tonight, but that's okay. I don't know if I should second though or not.
All right, if you make a motion.
I move to appoint Nancy Weiner to the Council on Aging, which with an expiration of June 30th, 2025.
And I'll second that.
So you would do a roll call by last name.
Okay, Barger, Weiner.
Fulgenetti Weiner?
Stacy Palucci.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, and Mrs. Palucci still outside?
We'll contact her.
We'll contact her and let her know. All right, terrific. Next, we have on the agenda
Appointment to the Commission on Disabilities.
appointment to the Commission on Disabilities, Jean Parinello, with a term expiring June 30th, 2026. Jean was on the Age Friendly Committee with me, so I know her very well. She's got a lot of background and experience with people with disabilities. Let me just go over her application. She's a retired registered nurse and healthcare administrator. She has case management, healthcare fraud investigation, home care nurse / administrator experience. Her prior experience, she was on the Commission on Disabilities from 2008 to 2012, and Age Friendly Easton from 2020 to 2024. Her relevant skills are experience, homes for livability for disabled and senior citizens. So I think she'd be an excellent addition to that committee.
I agree. Jan, you have any thoughts?
I also agree.
All right.
So I'll move to appoint to the Commission on Disabilities Jean Parinello with a term expiring June 30th, 2026.
Second.
So that's Barger and Stacy, and that'll be a roll call starting with you, Jen.
Stacy Parinello.
Fulgenetti Parinello.
Barger, Parinello.
Excellent. All right, now the moment we've all been waiting for, the town administrator presentation on fiscal year 2026, the preliminary operating budget.
Great. Thanks, Dottie. Good evening to the board. And Jen, thanks for logging in remotely for this. So tonight I'm here to present the preliminary fiscal 2026 budget to the board and anyone at home watching and the public. While the presentation that I had tonight is pretty detailed, I'd like to kind of cut right to the chase. None of this should be surprising to the board or folks who've been following along, but next year for Easton is going to be extremely difficult. High inflation, ballooning insurance costs, minimal state aid, and expiring federal grants are all coming to a head at the same time as we head into fiscal 26. Collectively, what this means is that our operating and fixed budgets are getting pushed far above levels that can be sustained by our existing revenue. And we're not going to be able to balance the budget without substantial cuts to operations from town and the schools. Those operating budgets for our town departments and for the school department are between 82 to 85% personnel. They're people, the people who provide services to this community. And much of the remaining 15% is for unavoidable costs, things like energy, special education, transportation, things that when budgets get tight, folks look at and say, well, have you tried trimming here or there? Which is a perfectly fine question, but you can't not pay for your utilities, right? So what that means is when you're in a budget situation, when you're cutting an operating budget, is that directly translates to reductions in our positions, in jobs, and a reduction in the quality of public and educational services in the community. For preliminary general fund budget requests, fund only a level service, which means what we're providing today, they total over 110 million, which is far in excess of our preliminary revenue forecast of 1.4 million, which yields probably the most substantial preliminary deficit the town has seen at 6.36 million. Now, before I get into the specifics of the fiscal 26 revenue and expense forecast, I think that we're all well served to talk about how we got to the position that we're in. Expenses growing faster than our revenue is certainly not a unique situation that only Easton is facing. This is something that's hitting cities and towns and school districts all around the Commonwealth right now. Easton is particularly suited, frankly, for managing tough budgets because our second largest source of revenue, which is state aid, has grown at an annualized average of less than 1% for 17 years now. Because of that, we have always had to, and we have fought hard successfully to delay the arrival of a year like this as long as we possibly could. And we've saved or avoided millions in expenses along the way by doing things like regionalizing services, consolidating departments, and in-housing special education and other services in the town and school government. We've reformed health insurance, and we've leveraged solar generation and grant-funded efficiency projects to drive down our energy consumption in our town and school buildings. And Easton is one of the first municipalities in the state to reach what's called the kind of 20% club, where in the Green Communities program under the state of Massachusetts, we set out on a relatively ambitious plan to cut our energy consumption in our public buildings by 20% from our baseline. And we've actually accomplished that, which is not only good for reducing our carbon footprint, but that's 20% reduction in what we're spending. We have incented millions in sustainable revenue growth without an override by constructing our first 3 and only sewer districts and working with the planning board and town meeting to adopt zoning reform so folks can do more with their existing property. We've also adopted years of conservative operating budgets that have delivered quality services here with fewer dollars being spent per capita than comparable and neighboring communities. And this is an approach that's served us well for almost 20 years. So in the context of a tough budget presentation, I hope that it's clear as I go through this and as PACE goes through their work that this isn't necessarily because we haven't had an approach that was workable. Which then begs the question, if we had identified a formula that was working, why can't we just keep doing it? What has changed recently that's putting us in this position? So there's really 2 key things since fiscal 24, only 18 months ago, that are pushing Easton past the breaking point. One of those things we anticipated, and that's the expiration of pandemic-era federal funding, so things like the American Rescue Plan Act and ESSER. Those were federal grants that provided millions to towns and schools across the United States to mitigate pandemic health, economic, and educational impacts. Those programs expired at the end of the last calendar year, and what that means is that we're going to take a hit on both the revenue side and the expense side. On the revenue side, under ARPA, there was a program called Revenue Replacement where the federal government, Congress, looked at what happened in 2008, which were mass layoffs around the United States of police, fire, public works, educators, when states had to restrict their local aid. And they gave the flexibility to communities to tap into these federal funds to supplement revenue losses caused by or related to economic conditions. We, of course, knew that this was not money forever, and so we have been gradually ramping that down from $750,000 to $430,000. But even with that being planned, that's a $430,000 reduction in our revenue. On the expense side, there are programs and services that were explicitly targeted by these federal funds that either need to be absorbed into our operating budgets or eliminated, and that's probably roughly $1 million. These programs are things like interventionists. They are things like layoff restoration funds that we leaned on from cuts to the police department we made in fiscal 21. And we had planned to absorb those over time into our operating budgets. But fixed costs have consumed that capacity. And fixed costs is the area that has really fundamentally changed in a way that we could not have anticipated due to how unprecedented the severity is. And it's pushing us past the brink on our budget. So the second of those two things that's fundamentally changed in the past 18 months for us is the explosion in fixed cost inflation. Working with PACE has been really good because it's given me an opportunity to reflect on how overly technical some of our budget memos are. This budget memo is certainly no exception. But in speaking to people, if you ask them what's happened to your healthcare costs in the past few years, what's happened to the cost of heating your home, what's happened to the cost of insuring your car or your home, those things have exploded for many people. And the same is true for us, but instead of one healthcare plan, we have hundreds. Instead of a home to heat, we have nearly 1 million square feet of buildings and public property to insure. And so what that looks like for us in a 2-year window is that our healthcare premiums have increased by $2 million, which is 21%. Our pension assessment has increased by $900,000, which is 16%. Our property and liability insurances have grown by $210,000, which is 17%. And our regional school assessments, which again, that's a fixed cost that we don't have control over, those have increased by more than $500,000, which is 35%. Just those 4 fixed costs have increased by $3.6 million in only 2 years, which has consumed more than half of all of new recurring operating revenue that would have been otherwise been available to fund Easton's operations. So when you set out, you carve out any debt exclusion for building projects, but recurring operating revenue available has grown by about 6.8 million, and just those 4 items have eaten up 3.6 million of it. So what that means, if you want to...
No, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just got a message on my watch that somebody's watching and there's no audio.
Oh, that's a problem.
So I don't know, Joe, if you can hear me. It seems like there's no audio for this presentation. They can see the video.
I hear audio on my side, but I'm not sure if I'm on a different feed or something.
Well, you're on the Zoom, so this must be somebody who's watching it on ECAT.
No, our audio.
Okay, just want to make sure it wasn't
Joe,
through the Zoom.
Are you with us, Joe?
Can we fix it for the rest of this, what we're doing tonight, or does that mean we have no audio on the channel at all?
Do you want to take this out of order and we could do the budget presentation after, and that gives ECAT some time, or what?
How much time would you need, Joe, or?
Yeah, not to put you on the spot while we're in a live meeting.
All right, why don't we do that? We'll take this out of order.
For anyone watching.
Yeah, if anybody's watching, we're going to skip to the next items on the agenda, and we'll go back to this after Joe makes his adjustments. All right, thank you, Joe. All right, let me see, what do we have next? So that's item 6.
Sure.
So item 6 is the discussion and vote for authorization of available Stonehill gift funds for promoting a sustainable Easton PACE for a mailing and postage. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Connor?
Sure, thank you, Dottie. So as the board is aware, and hopefully folks in the public are becoming aware, related to the previous discussion item of the budget, we had a really difficult budget going into the current year, which is fiscal 25. And so at town meeting in May of 24, voters adopted an amendment to the budget that led to promoting a sustainable Easton that goes by PACE. This is a 19-member committee of elected leadership, town and school leadership, educators, public safety personnel, and many Easton residents. And their job, per that vote of town meeting, is to review the town's operating position, the school operating position, how we spend our public funds, and report to the select board and the community on what is the best path forward in their estimation for a sustainable budget position for the town of Easton. In order to do that, they've had a really aggressive calendar and schedule. That means that by the end of March, they need to have a formal report from the select board and the school committee. Something that's been important to PACE is trying to bring the public in. These are 4 to 5 hour long public meetings. They're pretty intensive. They're not the easiest thing to engage with. And so we held an open house in January that we were really happy to see was really well attended for what's ostensibly a budget meeting, as opposed to like a board budget meeting, as we all see. People were really engaged. They had great questions for the committee, and the committee is looking to do another open house before they finalize their recommendations. And based on what their estimation is, they'll have draft recommendations by this point. They want to present them, get feedback from folks before they finalize and send them off to the select board and the school committee. These are going to be really important decisions. And so what PACE had inquired about is whether or not, as we've done with other really consequential community decisions that involve town meeting, is send a postcard, an informational mailer to notify folks that there will be this additional open house opportunity on Wednesday, February 26th. And so looking at what those mailers typically cost, plus a bit of a balance in the event that the price has escalated more than we anticipate, I'm requesting the board consider allocating $6,500 of the available unallocated Stonehill donation gift funds for purposes of mailing and other outreach for PACE to make sure that we're notifying the community of their ability to participate and inviting them to do so. It's well within the current balance of the unallocated gift funds from the college. It's a good use of those funds because it doesn't tap in any kind of tax dollars. Obviously, we have a very tight operating position, and so I would request your approval.
Okay. Any comments?
Oh,
questions?
I think it's a great use of the money. I think the mailings that we did for the municipal building was very helpful, and I think that we should continue to do that at the very least for this February 26th open house.
Okay.
Jen, any questions, comments?
No questions. I just agree with everything Craig just said.
Okay. I think so also. I mean, we're very limited in the way that we can reach people, although the town crier has a really good footprint. Not having a newspaper really hurts us. So there's nothing worse than when we try everything to reach people and then still people will say, I never heard about it. We rely heavily on social media, but not everybody's on social media. So I definitely support this. Like you said, this is a very important and consequential issue for our town. And the more people that we can bring in to understand this before town meeting, the better.
Absolutely.
You want to make a motion?
So I move to authorize the use of available Stonehill gift funds in the amount of $6,500 for promoting a sustainable Easton mailing postage prior to the February 26th, 2025 open house.
Second.
So that's Bodger and Stacy, and that'll be a roll call vote. Start with you, Jen.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes?
Barger, yes.
Awesome.
Excellent.
All right, next, item 7, vote consent to an easement at 560 Foundry Street to be granted by Sawmill Village to Massachusetts Electric Company, and a grant of easement by the Town of Easton to Massachusetts Electric Company. Hey, Stephanie,
Good evening, everybody.
does this mean we're getting closer to a traffic light?
This gets us closer to a traffic light.
Awesome.
So the board will recall that as part of the mitigation for the Sawmill project, the developer is responsible for widening the road and has already installed the traffic lights, but they cannot actually be activated until such time as the road is widened. He's been waiting for quite a while for National Grid to move the telephone poles, the utility poles. So before you tonight is a request to vote to consent to an easement that is being granted by Sawmill Village to Mass Electric Company and Verizon New England. So a little bit of explanation. The town granted the, the town accepted an easement from Sawmill LLC to allow widening of the road, and then the town will maintain the road ongoing. And because the town holds an easement, in order to grant the easement to Mass Electric, the board needs to consent to that easement.
Sure.
Additionally, as a result of the moving of the telephone poles, the utility poles, there will be aerial lines that cross from one pole to another in one location over town property. It happens to be the pump station, so if people want to know where it is. And so the town needs to grant an easement as well to Mass Electric. So the board is asked to vote to consent to the easement that's being granted to Mass Electric and to grant an easement to Mass Electric.
So this will expedite the completion of the movement of the poles?
We certainly hope so. We expect that by taking this step that Mass Electric or National Grid is
We'll be able
planning
to
to
move
move
those poles.
forward shortly.
Awesome. Great. Any questions, Jen?
No questions. It sounds like a great opportunity for progress. So
Awesome.
thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
So I move to consent to an easement at 560 Foundry Street to be granted by Sawmill Village to Massachusetts Electric Company, and a grant of easement by the Town of Easton to Massachusetts Electric Company.
Second, Stacy.
So that's Bodger and Stacy, and a roll call vote, starting with Jen.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes?
Barger, yes.
Excellent. All right. Number 8 is a discussion and vote memorandum of agreement with Massachusetts Development Financing Agency, a public planning process for future surplus municipal properties at 130 Center Street, DPW, 46 to 48 Lothrop Street, Police and Fire, and 413 to 417 Bay Road and 11R Highland Street. This would be an authorization of the town administrator to sign the memorandum of agreement.
Sure. Thank you, Dottie. Attached in your packet, there's an MOA from Mass Development Finance Agency. It's for $50,000 of real estate technical services and assistance that has been awarded to Easton. It would basically be a planning grant to help us do public outreach and community planning ahead of schedule to try and work with the community, as we had identified back in 2023 going for the building projects, that we would use the time between approval and construction completion and move-in to host some type of community process to hear from folks of what are the things that they may like to see the future vacated buildings be used for. So the Mass Development has a contract with Studio Luz. We'll pay them directly to evaluate the sites and work with the town and stakeholders to develop a shared vision for them, including development scenarios that we could use in future RFPs if that's the direction the board and town meeting want to go. It's a technical assistance grant that takes the form of a low-interest loan, such as that if the town receives income from selling or leasing the properties in the future, we would repay Mass Development with $50,000 plus 5%. We've checked to inquire, well, what happens if we go through this visioning process, and the decision of the community and its leadership is we want to just hold on to these or reuse them for some type of public use. And the answer that we've been given is that we would then have that loan forgiven.
Correct.
We've also checked and confirmed that it is not a reimbursable where we would be laying out the funds. Is that correct?
Correct.
And this would be paid directly by the state to the studio.
To lose, correct.
Great. Any questions?
What is 11R Highland? Is that behind? Is
Yeah,
that behind
ours.
the water?
That's behind
It's behind the
the,
water
yes,
division.
Behind the water division over
Yes.
to Highland? Okay,
Yep.
all right. Okay, all right.
And so the request from the planning board and myself is that the board vote to approve the MOA and authorize me to sign it.
So I'm fine with that. Jen, are you?
Yeah, we reviewed this in the Affordable Housing Trust, and the full group agreed that it was a good move. Any opportunity to engage the public on a use of these really, important properties is good money spent. So, I mean, and not even spent unless we actually do anything to sell the property. So, I think it's a really smart thing to do.
Excellent.
All right, me too.
So I move to approve the memorandum of agreement with Mass Development Finance Agency, the public planning process for future surplus municipal properties at 130 Center Street, the DPW facility, 46 to 48 Lutheran Street, the police and fire, and 413 to 417 Bay Road, which is also the fire department, and 11R Highland Street. Authorization of the town administrator to sign the MOA. In the
Second,
amount of
Stacy.
$1,000. I'm sorry.
Oh, all right.
Go ahead.
Second, Stacy.
So that's Bodger and Stacy. Roll call vote.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes.
Barger, yes.
All right. Next, we have a discussion and vote on memorandum of agreement extension regarding Town of Easton conservation restriction at 55 and 59 Pond Street with the trustees of reservations.
So the board will recall that the town voted at annual town meeting in May 2022 to purchase a conservation restriction on 5.76 acres of land located at 5559 Pond Street, colloquially referred to as the island, and this would expand the holdings by the Governor Ames estate. There were several delays in the actual transfer or conveyance of that property to the trustees. That has since happened, and the conservation restriction was submitted to the state, has been reviewed. We've received initial comments and are in the process to responding to those comments, which we really were not, they were important and we need to address them, but they're nothing that was significant. This gives enough time for the CR process, the approval of the conservation restriction by the Department of Conservation and Conservation Services to finalize their review and to have the documents recorded.
Okay. Any questions?
No. I move to approve the planning department's request. The select board approve the attached memorandum of agreement extension amendment for the conservation restriction purchase at 55 to 59 Pond Street and authorize the chair to sign it. This would run through September 30th, 2025.
Okay.
Second, Stacy.
So that's Bodger and Stacy, and a roll call vote.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes.
Barger, yes.
All right, excellent. Next, vote for the town administrator, I can't talk, to authorize the town administrator to accept the Housing Choice Grant for Foundry Street Advanced Design.
Sure, thank you, Dottie.
This is good news.
It is
Very
great
good
news. I request the board vote to grant me authority to accept a $500,000 grant from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Housing Choice Program for the Foundry Street improvement design. These funds will go towards and advance the ongoing design for an eventual Foundry Street tip project funded by state and federal funds for construction to replace culverts, add sidewalks, bike lanes, and improve the whole corridor, a Depot Street scale project. We, as the board may recall, have an agreement with Mass DOT for what at that time was estimated to be a potentially $15 million construction project by DOT. The final construction costs will remain to be seen, but what is typically the case is that a municipality is responsible for advancing design and easements and things of that nature to get the project shovel ready. We have a pretty good track record of doing things like this, like with Depot Street, Washington, and Elm Street will be coming up this year, Union and Washington. So this is a great program, and it's great that we are able to leverage state grants towards that local contribution, so to speak, to keep this moving.
Excellent.
It's excellent. Terrific.
All right. Any questions?
No, I don't have
Nope.
any.
All right.
I
Craig?
move to authorize the town administrator to accept the Housing Choice Grant, Foundry Street Advanced Design, in the amount of $500,000.
Second, Stacy.
So that's Bodger and Stacy. Roll call vote, starting with you, Jen.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes.
Barger, yes.
And I do want to just make a comment to thank you, Stephanie. That's a pretty significant grant, and it seems like we get such big grants pretty often that we're kind of used to it, and I want to acknowledge it's a lot of work to do these grants, and it's a lot of work to administer them when we get them.
Right.
And you do a really great job with that, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's the department working together and working with town administration and everybody, so you're welcome and thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
The next one is a contract award. Yep. Of course. Yep. Sure. All right, we're going to take a 2-minute break and we'll be back soon. Thank you. All right, thank you. We appreciate everyone bearing with us a little bit. We have some technical challenges tonight. Jen, are you still with us?
I am. I have my camera off if that's okay.
Excellent. You can keep that off because we're going to just be focused on the presentation for a while, so no worries.
Okay. If at any point I need to turn it on and I can, I will.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, great. So round two, for anyone who is on Zoom or YouTube, I appreciate your patience as we cover the beginning of this again. So good evening. Thank you. This is good. This is doing it on hard mode. All right.
We'll do it on test. We'll do a test to see if you can hear better on this one.
I feel like this means karmically everything will go perfectly at town meeting. Is that better, Joe? All right, great. Sorry, Sean. Okay, round three. Good evening, and thank you, Dottie, and to the board. I appreciate the chance to present the preliminary fiscal 26 budget to you and anyone following along at home tonight. There's a detailed budget memo that is associated with this presentation that's going to be online. The board has received it, and the presentation itself is rather detailed, but I will cut right to the chase with the top line here, which is that the coming fiscal year is going to be extremely difficult for this community. High inflation, ballooning insurance costs, minimal state aid, and expiring federal grants are all coming to a head at the same time in fiscal year 26. And what that means is that collectively, these forces are pushing our fixed and operating budget requests far above levels that we could sustain with our revenue. We're not going to be able to balance the budget without substantial reductions to our operating budgets. And those budgets for the town and school departments are between 82 and 85% personnel, the people who work for us, who deliver the public services that we all rely on. And much of the remaining 15% is for unavoidable costs for things like energy, utilities, special education, transportation. These are not costs that the town or schools are able to pick up a phone and say, we want to pay less to National Grid. They must be paid. And so what that ultimately means is that to meaningfully cut operating budget requests directly translates to reductions in jobs and reduction or elimination of public and educational services. The preliminary general fund budget request, which is a level service request, and what that means is it's the cost of doing today's business tomorrow as inflation rages on, is $110.5 million, which is far in excess of our preliminary revenue outlook of $104 million, and that yields what is likely the most substantial preliminary deficit that we've had to work with here, which is $6.36 million. Before getting into the details of a fiscal 26 revenue and expense forecast, we will all be well served, I think, to talk about how we got here in the first place. Expenses growing faster than revenue is certainly not something unique only to Easton. This is a situation that cities, towns, and school districts all around Massachusetts are currently in. Easton, in a somewhat ironic way, is rather suited for facing down challenges like this because we are used to revenue challenges. Our second largest revenue source which is revenue from the state itself, has grown at a rate of less than 1% annually when you average it out for 17 years now. And because of that, Easton has had to, and we have successfully fought hard to delay the arrival of a year like this for as long as possible. And we've done that many ways. Top of that list is saving or avoiding millions in expenses by regionalizing services like 911, consolidating departments like health and community services, in-housing things like special education and other public services, reforming health insurance, and leveraging solar generation and grant-funded efficiency projects to drive down the amount of power that our public buildings are consuming. Easton is one of the first communities as part of the Massachusetts Green Communities program to join what's called the 20% Club, where we set out to reduce our building's power consumption by 20% in 5 years, and we actually met those targets. And that's not only good for reducing our carbon footprint, that really hedges against the ever-increasing cost of energy. We have also worked on the revenue side to incent millions in sustainable revenue growth without an override by constructing our first and only 3 sewer districts when we had none as recently as 2012, and working with the Planning and Zoning Board and Town Meeting to adopt zoning reform so that folks could do more with their existing property and grow the tax base. We have also at the same time adopted years of conservative operating budgets that have delivered quality services with fewer dollars spent per capita than comparable and neighboring communities. This approach has served us very well for nearly 20 years, and I say that because as PACE, which is the citizen committee created by town meeting last year, has identified, this is a problem that is nearly universal in scope facing communities around the Commonwealth, and it is not a result of Easton somehow overspending its operations in the town or school department. Which then begs the question, if that approach was working, why can't we just keep doing that? And what's changed? And so really 2 key things have changed since fiscal 24, which only began 18 or 19 months ago, and are pushing us past the breaking point. One of those things we anticipated and planned for, and that was the expiration of federal pandemic era funding. Things like the American Rescue Plan Act and ESSER provided millions to towns and schools around the country to mitigate pandemic health, economic, and educational impacts. Those programs expired at the end of last year, and that's going to hit us on both the revenue and the expense side of our budget. On the revenue side, under the American Rescue Plan, Congress recognized that in the last major financial downturn in 2008, the recovery programs that passed did not sufficiently lift up cities and towns around the country. And so when states cut their budgets back in 2008, there was substantial amounts of job losses in the public sector that took years and years and years and years to recover to, in many cases right up to about 2020 when COVID hit. And so the American Rescue Plan included what were called revenue replacement funds for cities and towns, where they could shore up their revenue and offset marginal growth during the wake of the pandemic. And in Easton, we did use those, and we planned for their expiration. We've walked that down from $750,000 in 24 to $430,000 in the current year, and we knew that that would go down to 0 this year. On the expense side, we knew we would either need to fund or cut approximately $1 million in programmatic services funded by both ESSER and ARPA by either moving them into operating budgets for the town or school or eliminating them if we couldn't. These programs aren't kind of nice to haves. They're things like interventionists for mitigating learning loss for students and things like restoring job cuts in the police department that we implemented during the last downturn in fiscal 21. And so we had worked on a graduated descending drawdown on our reserves to give us time to absorb these into the budget. But what has fundamentally changed in that period of time is what's happening with our fixed costs that have consumed our ability to see that through. So I said before, there was 2 key changes since fiscal 24 that are really pushing us past the breaking point. One of them we planned for and anticipated, which was the expiration of those federal funds. And the other one is something that is so substantial that we frankly could not have. And that's the explosion in fixed cost inflation from fiscal 24 to 26. And when I say fixed costs, that sounds kind of amorphous, this blob of overhead spending that people can't think about. And so talking with people, you would identify this as, the costs of living or doing business that we don't really have a whole lot of choice but to pay. Healthcare premiums, retirement, property and liability insurances, and then assessments to regional bodies like regional schools. And so when you ask someone what they've seen in their own lives with the 20+% inflation in recent years when it comes to their healthcare or their home insurance or heating their homes, we're experiencing the same thing, except not managing one family healthcare plan. We have multiple hundred plans for our town and school and retirees. We have to heat and provide electricity to closer to 1 million square feet of buildings rather than one home. We have a large fleet of vehicles to insure. And so what that looks like for Easton is that in a 2-year window, based on what our estimates for fiscal 26 currently are, our healthcare premiums have increased by $2 million, which is 21%. Our pension assessment has grown by $900,000, which is 16%. Our property and liability insurance has gone up $210,000, which is 17%. And our regional school assessments are up 35% at $500,000. These 4 fixed costs alone have increased by $3.6 million in 2 years. During that same 2-year window, the total new revenue growth in Easton available to fund operations is about $6.8 million. So that means that more than half of our operating capacity growth in 2 years has been wiped out by these costs we have to pay before a dollar can go to town or school departments, to the police department, the fire department. And what that means is a really frustrating reality for our taxpayers where their tax bill is going up, and yet the town is claiming that it can't sustain the services that they need. No idea what those red lines are because they're not on my presentation, but this just continues the trend that we're working with today. So then that begs the question, well, why didn't we plan for these challenges? And the answer is that we did. We have worked really hard to prepare the town to be as well positioned as a minimum aid, largely suburban community with 1/3 of all of its land preserved and generating little to no taxes could. We have in 7 years grown our stabilization fund, which is functionally the town's saving account, by 400% from 1.7 to 7 million. We've adopted conservative budgets for the town and school department that from fiscal 19 through 24, before these fixed costs started really exploding, had an annualized average increase of about 2.75%, despite inflation during that time period far outpacing it. We have won, we just heard it earlier, that was another $500,000. We have won more than $60 million in competitive state and federal grants to lessen the burden of capital projects on our taxpayers and to promote growth. That growth has increased recurring revenues, with fiscal 25 seeing Easton's best year for new growth ever at $1.5 million of new revenue from improved property, from new construction. And we planned for a multi-year drawdown on a portion of our savings to offset the loss of those federal funds gradually. So then the next question may be, okay, well, you planned for that aspect, but what have you done to cut spending? The budget's getting tight. What are the cuts? And we have made cuts. In the current year we're in right now, in order to balance fiscal 25, we reduced police staffing, we reduced public safety training, we cut supply and expense budgets for all town and school departments across the board by 10%. We've shifted costs that really should be recurring general fund services to fee-based programs, and we've left many positions on the town side and many on the school side that are needed unfunded on a semi-permanent basis. Before this year, we have consolidated departments and positions. We've dissolved entire local departments like 911 and regionalized them to provide a better service at a substantially lower cost. We've in-housed services like special education and others where we can get a better outcome for our residents and students at a smaller dollar amount than if we outsource them. We have deferred capital programs that we know we need to invest in, like spending more on our roads or on our fleet, but just simply don't have the ability to do that because we are trying to offset our operating position. And again, we reduced our energy spend substantially with solar, LED conversions, and others. And so what this has done gives you that chart on the right, which is that we have extremely lean town and school operating budgets that spend far below most peers on a per resident or per student basis. People can look this information up at easton.ma.us/PACE, P-A-S-E, Or if they don't feel comfortable taking our word for it on the town's own website, they could go to the State Department of Revenue website and look at these per capita spend figures. These are not shown here as a point of pride. It is not a good thing that Easton's general government spends less than half the amount per resident than our comparable communities. It is not a point of pride that the general government in Easton is in some years the lowest spending per capita of any town in the entire state, which sounds so melodramatic that you have to go to the Department of Revenue site to check, but it is there. We may have moved up to 5th or 6th from the bottom as the data gets updated, but all of those efforts have led to us being incredibly lean. But unfortunately, that's not enough. Fixed costs like healthcare, liability insurances, pensions, regional school costs going up 10% a year for multiple years in a row has eliminated the runway that we've worked very hard for years to create. Coupled with decades of minimum state funding growth and the expiration of those federal funds, our options are severely limited. And the size of the deficit, which is, again, $6.36 million, is so large that we're just not going to be able to innovate or reorganize our way out of it this time. And town and school budgets will need to be cut if we are going to balance the budget.
So usually we start at like a 2.5 million?
1 to 2 million is a pretty typical preliminary deficit that we start the year with. A 1 million shortfall year, you can button up in 1 or 2 budget changes. 2+ million is a tight year. Last year, or the current year, we're in fiscal 25, was notable because it was over 3 million for the first time, and obviously we worked very hard to notify people of the fact that this would compound and become more severe, and voters recognized that at the town meeting in May and adopted the charge for PACE. So yes, I mean, depending on how you want to count it, this is 3 times more severe than what we are typically facing at this point of the year.
Yeah, I think it's important to put it into that context because to me, this is catastrophic at this point.
It's very bad. And I think also for folks who do occasionally follow along, there's perhaps what seems like a cry wolf effect where we always start with a deficit and we always find a way to just figure it out or we find the money. And it's not that we find money. It's that through things like what I talked about on the previous slides, like cutting positions or underfunding programs that we know we need to fund, like our roads, plus refining our revenue estimates and tapping reserves, we're able to close the gap for 12 months at a time. We're now at a point where that's not going to be enough. But I appreciate the question and the clarification is important. So this section is going to cover the actual specifics of our revenue and expense forecast for the coming year. Total revenue is forecast to increase modestly by 3.8 million, which is about 3.85% over the current year. However, a large amount of that, 2.8 million, is exempt revenue for bonds for the new police, fire, and public works facilities. So what that actually means is that out of that 3.8 million increase in revenue, which is not enormous against a $100+ million budget, 2.8 of that is not for operations. So there's roughly a $1 million or 1% increase in available revenue over the current year that contributes substantially to the deficit. A large driver of that really small increase is that there is a massive reduction to reserves and other that you could see here on the screen in red due to the expiration of federal funds and reduced local reserve use. That's a cut of 1.8 million or 41%. Stabilization fund use will be carefully assessed as the budget progresses, but even if a large sum of our balance is used, one of the things I hope folks take away from this is we cannot close a deficit of this size just using reserves. That is not an option, and I'll expand on that in a moment. Looking at our revenue portfolio, so to speak, as you can see here, taxation is clearly our largest source of revenue. Some really key points here. It is 3/4 of our general fund revenue, 75%. The tax levy, that's how much total tax revenue we can collect in a year, by state law can only go up 2.5% plus any new growth. That cap can be increased on a temporary or permanent basis by an override only approved by voters at the ballot box. The last operating override was passed in 2006. And so absent an override, your only opportunity to grow that levy, which is our largest source of revenue, is through new growth. New growth is the taxable value of new or improved property. So that's expansions on a home, expansions on a business, new construction. And it's essential to the healthy to the creation of a healthy tax base, as it's the only way we can increase that total revenue stream, as I noted, without an override. Easton has for a decade worked really hard to promote new growth through the construction of sewer and other infrastructure, and working with the planning board to adopt zoning reform in our key development districts, and it's worked. Some good news is that fiscal 25, and probably some of the only good news in this budget presentation, is that the new growth that we actualized in the current year is the best we've ever seen. It's on screen. It's that very large green outlier. That's double what we typically have been doing in post-COVID, and it's 50% greater than even some of our best years pre-COVID. So that's great. But as we go through this presentation, what folks need to be keeping in mind is that the current financial climate that we are in makes incentivizing new growth on a continuous basis absolutely essential for the long-term fiscal stability of a community like Easton. The second largest source of our revenue from that pie graph is state aid. State aid has two particularly important revenues for the community. One is called Chapter 70 Education Aid. This is education funding for K-12 schools throughout Massachusetts, and then unrestricted general government aid. Our budget, because we published this a month earlier than typical, was drafted prior to the governor publishing her state budget last week. And so we're forecasting a really meager growth of just over 1% for state aid to a total of $14.4 million. The governor's budget last week actually would have some modest improvements to that. She has proposed $75 per pupil minimum aid rather than $30, which I'll come back to. But that gets you another point or point and a half. You're still with an extremely modest and sub-inflation growth factor there. We have been dealing with this for 17 years, as I noted in the intro, and that really modest 1%-ish growth from the cuts in 08 has seen the percentage of our public school operating budget that used to be covered by state aid drop from 31% back in 2010 to 22% now. And necessarily what that means is that the difference has to be made up with other local revenues like taxes, local receipts and reserves. And this doesn't mean the school budget is growing too fast. This just means that if a third of their programmatic revenue from the state starts only going up 1% per year, that if their budget goes up by more than that, it needs to come from other revenue sources. So again, those two state revenues are really important, Chapter 70 and unrestricted aid. Easton has long been an outlier. Our district is what's called minimum aid. And when your school is a minimum aid district, what that means is that under the kind of complex funding formulas the state relies on for providing that K-12 state funding, is that no matter how well the state's bottom line program is doing, and so folks will hear and see in the news that there's historic amounts of state funding for K-12 education, which is true. But whether Chapter 70 goes up by 1%, 5%, or 10%, and some districts benefit from that, when you are a minimum aid district like Easton Public Schools, it means you're entitled to only $30 of new state funding per student per year. And what that translates to is about $100,000 of new revenue against a $50 million operating budget, which is 1/4%. This has been Easton Public Schools' operating position for over a decade. As I noted in the slides in the beginning that we are facing some fundamentally different things right now in Easton, that's also true in the state. And as of the current year, now 2/3 of school districts have become minimum aid due to declining enrollment and other economic factors. It's not a coincidence that the frequency of operating overrides around Massachusetts has doubled, and those are real figures that again can be checked on the State Department of Revenue website. The frequency that communities are seeking overrides has doubled in 18 months at the same time that 2/3 of schools have slid into becoming minimum aid. Our second largest source of state revenue is called unrestricted general government aid, lovingly known as UGA. That's forecast to increase by about 2% to $2.75 million next year. What you see on that graph on screen, which is a little bit hard to read, but the red line is 2008 level funding, is that this revenue account was cut, not cut as in it didn't keep up when adjusted for inflation. It was just cut by hundreds of millions on a state level during the 08 recession, and has not yet today in 2025 recovered to even nominal 08 dollars. That means not even adjusting for inflation. The amount of money going out the door in Boston to the 351 cities and towns of Massachusetts is less today and has been less every day since 2008. When you adjust that for inflation, it's a bit more depressing, and we've lost close to 30% 12% of purchasing power from that account. The cumulative impact of Chapter 70 minimum education aid, along with those cuts to unrestricted aid, is really substantial. And had Easton's 2008 state aid just kept pace with inflation since then, this year we would have received $17 million in state aid, and we actually received 12.9. So that's a pretty huge gap, not suggesting that the state automatically could or even could financially support inflation level increases, but this shows that as the cost of doing business has grown in those 17 years, our second largest revenue account was cut and then took a very long time to begin growing again, and the gap there compared to inflation is huge. Looking at our other revenue categories, local receipts are the third largest source of our revenue. Local receipts are things like excise taxes, ambulance revenues, meals tax. Those have been doing rather well in recent years. We're forecasting a 3.2% increase here to about 8.5 million. But because those are about 8.5% of our portfolio, so to speak, even if those are growing at 5, 6, 7% a year, it's not enough to eclipse 1% increases to state aid or a 2.5% cap on your taxation. But we'll look at those as the year goes on and increase those if the year-to-date actuals support it. Reserves and other financing sources, that's the the smallest category of our revenue. Those are forecast to be cut substantially by almost 1.9 million or 41% going into the next year. And the main drivers are accounted for on screen. ARPA revenue replacement we knew was going away, that's 430,000. Free cash, our policies say that no more than half of the available free cash from a preceding year can be used in the forthcoming year's operating budget. So as our free cash declines year over year, that means that we have fewer dollars to put in the budget. You ideally want to put none of these in the operating budget, but even sticking to that maximum 50%, that's a reduction of 503,000. Stabilization currently is showing as zero in the preliminary budget. We know, given the size of this deficit, that we will need to apply an amount of stabilization funds as part of the complex solution of eliminating the deficit. But we opted not to assume an amount in this first budget presentation because we did not want to sugarcoat the severity of the situation or misrepresent the town's true recurring operating capacity. So talking a little bit more about the stabilization fund. Dottie, you said this is a pretty severe outlook, and it's very hard when you're facing down such a challenging year to be thinking of the next year and the year after, but that's what we do need to do. And so that speaks to a question that sometimes comes up when we have tight budgets, which is, why are we having conversations about job cuts or program cuts when we have more money in the bank than the size of a problem? And so in this case, although our stabilization fund balance of 7 million is greater by a small amount than the forecasted deficit, attempting to address a deficit of this size solely with reserves is extremely irresponsible for a couple of reasons. One is that you simply cannot fund recurring financial costs with one-time money. And the other is that if you do so at an irresponsible degree, we risk damaging the town's financial standing and its credit rating in the long term, which would actually worsen this process that we're facing. So we have a credit rating through Moody's, it's a bond rating, and if we over leverage our reserves to get through a tough year, and we have our bond rating downgraded as we're issuing millions of dollars in bonds for school security projects or police stations, that means that we will pay a higher interest rate on those 20 and sometimes 30-year notes for years and years and years, and can translate to thousands or millions of additional dollars that we must pay that for exempt debt projects like the police, fire, public works is passed directly through a tax increase. So we do not want that. Just as a homeowner wouldn't deliberately plan to pay their mortgage with a finite cash savings account, the town can't fund those recurring costs and a recurring deficit with limited savings. Taking a look at the expense side of the budget, here you see that about 49% of the operating budget is the school department, 20% is every town department, that's general government, health, community services, police, fire, public works, and then fixed costs are 31%. On screen, you'll see the current adopted budget, the preliminary requests, as well as the increases in dollar and percentage amounts. As I touched on in the introduction, the preliminary expense budget is forecast at 110.5 million. That's more than a 10% increase. It goes without saying, but needs to be said, that Obviously, we cannot fund that with our existing revenue, and so these budgets will need to be cut. The next slides will detail each of these major cost centers. So in the intro, I noted that fixed costs are really what's changing here, and I want to focus on that some more. Fixed costs include things like state set health insurance rates, county pension assessments, regional school assessments, and other expenses attributable to the town or school operations, or sometimes both. And what's on screen here, you see those 4 fixed costs that we have to pay, where they were in fiscal 24, where they are today, and what we're forecasting them to do next year. And again, $2 million for healthcare, 21% increase, $900,000 for pension, 16%, $210,000 for other insurances, for property, casualty, liability, that's 17%, and then regional schools growing 35%. This is $3.6 million of new costs we must pay against, during the same period of time, $6.8 million of revenue available to fund our operations.
And those fixed costs are town and school combined.
That's correct. So when you get into the actual department budgets, departments were instructed to submit level service budget requests. And what that means is, what's the cost to do tomorrow what we're already doing today? It incorporates known contractual costs for our personnel, as well as reasonably anticipated market increases and inflation for expenses we know we're going to have to pay, things like fuel. It also includes the absorption of any grant-funded programs set to expire, which in this year is obviously a substantial amount of them due to ARPA and ESSER. And that's what leads to these unusually large preliminary budget requests from both the town departments and the public schools at 5.4% and 8.2% respectively. What those budget requests do not include is restoration of any of the cuts we made in the current year to balance the budget. That means none of that funding goes towards restoring training budgets. None of that funding goes towards restoring expense lines. None of that budget increase goes towards replacing the police position we eliminated last year. Even when our fixed costs are not going up by 10+% every year, our operating budgets simply cannot regularly exceed 3 to 4% a year. And from fiscal 19 to 24, they didn't. And I think that's really important to repeatedly emphasize here. Town and school budgets grew at an annualized rate of about 2.75%. Regrettably, despite that, the current deficit is so severe that we have to set expectations, both for the board, anyone watching, that these budgets will have to be cut. We will not be able to sustain today's level of education and public services next year. I'd like to close talking about how we are going to get from tonight to town meeting on May 19th.
That's a great picture of Town Hall.
Thank you. So we're a month ahead of schedule right now, and we did that deliberately because PACE, which is the committee formed by town meeting last year, under their charge has to deliver recommendations to the select board and school committee and ultimately Easton voters on what a sustainable path forward here is, and they have to formalize and finalize those by the end of March. And so Wendy and I and the other department heads, the schools, wanted PACE to have a real preliminary budget to be working with for at least a couple of months while they consider from a menu of nearly universally painful choices. I really recommend anyone hearing this or watching this or sees these slides after to engage with the process with PACE. These are really, really big choices. These are public meetings where they're being discussed and debated. We have a dedicated website where all the finances we're relying on to make these decisions is public. It's easton.ma.us/PASE. As budget information develops, I will be issuing what we call budget change memos. Sure, I wish I had a better name. That's usually about once a month. These will itemize revenue and expense forecast changes and their impact on the deficit. Usually we expect that as we iterate the budget, and we always work towards balancing the budget by eliminating the deficit, but this is a really difficult year. And we know that even shortly after finalizing this budget, that new numbers came from some regional schools that are actually even higher than the increases we've talked about tonight. So those things will be incorporated as we issue budget changes. All of these presentations will be given to the Select Board of Public Meetings. They're posted to a dedicated budget webpage, and folks should really sign up for the town crier as well, because we will notify you of all these budgets being issued. Next steps as it pertains to our revenue. We do expect our revenue forecast to modestly improve. It typically does throughout the budget cycle as we assess the year-to-date actual collections for our local receipts in particular. That can help us be a bit more informed on whether we can improve those revenue assessments for next year, forecasts for next year, as well as engaging with the state leadership on the state's budget. We will be looking at our stabilization fund and carefully considering what is a safe and responsible amount, not just for this year, but for the next few years. And it can't be our first resort because these funds do need to last for many years. Another thing that will impact our revenue forecast is that various town boards and committees, along with our departments who have jurisdiction over permit and business fees, are going to be asked to increase those fees, which is something the town seldom does and does not want to do because we don't want to increase costs for residents or businesses. But our deficit is so severe that we can't not engage in that process and bolster our revenue where we can. On the expense side of the budget, we have a lot of work to do. With fixed costs, the GIC will set their final healthcare rates in February. We'll, of course, run that through our actual enrollments and see what that looks like and update accordingly. The Town and School Insurance Advisory Committee is going to have a meeting scheduled with my office where I can meet with those union leaders and talk with them about not just for rates for next year, but what these rates mean for the town's growing long-term financial liabilities. We are currently assessing different property and casualty insurers to see if our existing carrier and rate can be beat. And I'm assessing possible recommendations to the select board on longer-term OPEB costs, which are other post-employment benefits. On the town and school side, as I mentioned before, because 85% of our budgets, our positions, are the people who provide the services to our community, any meaningful reduction to this budget request from the town or school department will translate to reductions in personnel and cuts to public and education service. The superintendent and I and our teams will be carefully assessing and itemizing specifics once the budget continues to refine. I want to highlight, and I know this is like the cardinal sin of PowerPoint to have so many words on screen, but this is important for people to understand, is speaking for the town departments, some interim budget controls that we're implementing immediately, recognizing how severe next year will be. Numerous existing and budgeted vacancies in police, fire, and public works have been frozen and will be left unfilled until further notice. Other budgeted town openings have had their application solicitation, their job ads canceled outright in favor of eliminating positions within the union to further reduce headcount. Folks will start seeing some changes at Town Hall 2 weeks from now. The position we eliminated was one of two positions in the collections office. That is a department, one of the larger departments in Town Hall that has 5 people, so reducing a full position is a 20% reduction in operating capacity. That is not because that department can afford a 20% reduction in operating capacity. That is because it's akin to picking which finger hurts the least to cut off. And so what that means for the public is that we cannot ask our employees to take a 20% hit on their staff and operating capacity and then just continue doing the same business. It's not possible. And so that window will be closed half of a week permanently, unless and until this is restored, to walk-ins, to bill pay, to customer service, which is of course not what we want for the public, but we can't reduce department's capacity by 20% and still keep the output the same. This is a department that's also the treasury, that deals with borrowing, that deals with payroll. So they're shouldering a lot, and I appreciate the clerical union for working with me on that because it's a very hard situation.
How are we going to let people know about that if they're not watching this?
It's on the front page of a website, and with the excise bills that are going out, there's a buck slip that says due to budget cuts and staff reductions, the window will be closed and has new hours.
That was in the water bill.
There's also going to be signage at the office, so people see that. People can, of course, pay their bills via mail. They can pay online, but we will need to reduce the hours that it's open to the public.
Is there still a box out front to put bills into?
There is a box out front, yes. We're also looking at certain summer and seasonal programming and hiring. That's on hold pending review to make sure we actually have capacity to implement in fiscal 26, which is clearly not a guarantee. We're looking at additional ways that we may be able to shift certain general fund operations to fee-based or fee-supported positions to restructure functions and reduce general fund cost. None of these measures are good. They will reduce the quality of service that we can offer. They will increase involuntary overtime. They reduce our capacity to maintain our public infrastructure. And they further exacerbate the fact that these departments are already significantly understaffed compared to our peers and our neighbors. And as undesirable as these steps are, the severity of what we're facing next year warrants them. The final piece here is to talk about not the budget so much as a spreadsheet document, but as a value document. The choices that Easton faces between now and town meeting are going to be extremely difficult. We've talked a good amount tonight about some of them. This is not going to be an accounting exercise. These are fundamental value choices about who we are today and who we will be tomorrow. We have fought a really good fight, delaying this fork of a road for nearly 20 years without an override, but we're just at a tipping point now. Voters voiced their concern at the last town meeting about our operating position. After 4 out of 8 of the past annual town meetings, voters attempted to increase funding to town and school departments, usually with one-time funds. And PACE has been meeting tirelessly to assess all of these matters, and they reported in December that the choices of immediate term are 3. Substantial operating cuts, as we've talked about extensively tonight, increasing revenue through an operating override, or a blend of the two. As difficult as all these choices are, even that is not enough to address some of the permanent structural challenges that we'll face. And we're also going to need to grapple with and consider the long-term impacts of Easton's land use planning, preservation, and growth-related regulations. I mentioned in passing before, a substantial amount of Easton's land is preserved, otherwise undevelopable due to wetlands, or tax reduced or non-taxable. That's part of what makes Easton a beautiful place and what makes Easton Easton. It reflects decisions made by the community over generations. I'm not criticizing it and saying those were wrong decisions, but necessarily that means that the revenue to run a full service, $100 million plus organization serving 25,000 people must then come from the other 2/3 of a property. 2/3 of that property of which had no wastewater capacity until a decade ago. So we have made some important strides. We have fought this for a very long time, but those underlying structural forces are just getting to a point where, as I mentioned at the outset, we're not going to be able to just reorganize things and deal with this another day. The next 4 months are going to test us as professionals and as neighbors. The challenges that we've talked about here and talked about in many budget presentations didn't happen overnight or out of sight. The solutions are also not going to be immediate, permanent, or easy. The intensity of our effort and the significance of the stakes that we face shouldn't and can't, and they need not come at the expense of our compassion for one another and to try to do what's best for Easton, for the residents here, for the businesses here, and for our employees here. And we're not going to be able to get to best in every single person's view here. And so we have to do our best to find as much consensus where we can. There's a huge human impact here to the choices that we're going to make, because the reality is that any discussion of an override or a potential override is really a discussion about a fixed income senior being pushed even farther behind an already spiraling cost of living crisis, a young family priced out of Easton altogether, or a small business struggling to make ends meet. And on the other side of the ledger, any discussion about simply solving this through lobbing off millions in town or school operating budgets is not actually as simple as it sounds. And it's really a discussion about our public servants and educators worrying if they're going to lose their job that they have given years of their lives to. It's a question of first responders wondering if they will have the appropriate amount of backup they need on dangerous calls, or a parent asking if the services that their child relies on to grow and thrive will still be there next year. The only way to work through such a difficult path is to try to do that together. And I have worked here a very long time now. We've worked through some very hard things together. And I believe in Easton's ability to rise to that challenge. And I'll do my best to support the select board, the school committee, the finance committee, and PACE as we produce a balanced budget for May 19th's town meeting together. I'd like to wrap up here saying I appreciate the board giving me so much time to lay out the stakes in front of us. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge how much work goes into a budget like this, especially putting it out a month ahead of schedule, to my staff, all of our departments here and at the schools, as well as Wendy and the finance team. I'd like to thank and let everyone on PACE know that I appreciate them. That's been an incredible amount of commitment, an immense amount of hours put in. That team's been meeting for marathon 4 and 5 hour meetings on this multiple times a month since Labor Day, and I'm really thankful to have their perspective as we face a really tough budget in the coming year. So there's some links up on the screen here for folks to stay involved, stay engaged, because these are big choices for the community, and I'm happy to answer any questions the board has.
Well, that's a lot of information.
Boy, it certainly was. Very, very well done.
What are your first impressions, Craig?
Well, I've read the preliminary several times before tonight's meeting, and I'm very concerned and have been very concerned about this coming budget issue. We've talked about it for the last 2 or 3 years, I think that Connor has laid out a very comprehensive statement about what we have done in order to be able to compensate for the lack of revenue over the last few years. And you finally get to a point where, whether you're an individual homeowner or you're a member of this community, it can't happen anymore. We don't have the revenue. We've got to figure out a way to get beyond this. And not just for next year, but for years afterwards. And I particularly think it's important that Connor indicated about one-time revenue, that you can't spend all of that revenue this year, because then when next year comes, we're going to be in a bigger problem.
You owe that plus interest.
Yeah. So I think that it's incredibly important for people to attend PACE meetings, or to watch PACE meetings, or to read about PACE meetings, to ask us questions, to challenge us, as PACE has been doing, and so we can come to a consensus in May as to what our next steps are. And I know how difficult that is. And I appreciate the fact that that we talked about working together, that's the only way we get to the end result that's beneficial for this town and for the people who live here.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, this budget message, not to be too unprofessional, is functionally saying we're driving a car towards a cliff.
Absolutely.
And if we're all inside slap fighting over a radio station that's on,
Yeah.
then the public has no reason to take it seriously.
Right.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And I know this board wouldn't either.
Jen, are you still there? You don't have to put your video
I'm holding on over here.
First of all, I know you're not feeling well, and I really appreciate you being on there so we can have a quorum, because this is an important meeting. So you put
Yes. It's all good. It is important. I will keep it quick because I am not super articulate tonight, but I will just say that I'm not surprised yet still shocked at the same time, if that makes sense. We've known these factors were going to come to a head at some point, but I think the shocking part is how they came together in unison and how much of an impact it had. I think, the thing is that the town, under your leadership, Connor, working with the schools and all the department heads, had done a really good job of preparing for all of these things to eventually happen, but it's still shocking and it's going to be very painful. I just want to also compliment that there was a lot of good sound thought and policy around our town's use of ARPA and ESSER funds, which I think put us in a much better spot than a lot of other communities that made decisions that I think have hurt their budget in deeper ways. So, I applaud that's just one example of sound fiscal policy and, decision making, which sometimes can be really hard. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I just want to lift up a little bit, it gets said while we're kind of going through all the information, but when we're looking at these, and when I say we, I mean specifically the finance team and your office, Connor, and the school's finance, we're looking at a 5-year forecast out. So, being able to look at even this year versus next year, but also really looking at it for an extended period of time on what that means. So if we were so excited that we finally got the stabilization to 7 million, we can't use 3 million of that, because we won't even get past 2 years with that. So I know it's very tempting for people that aren't looking at this stuff every week, and I can certainly appreciate that because I probably might not be if I wasn't on the board either, to say, well, why don't you use the savings account and then worry about it next year? It's just, again, every lever that we pull is also being watched by the credit rating agencies. Even a giant layoff is going to be seen as not stable by
Correct.
a big credit agency. So like everywhere we turn, it's like a closed door in trying to do this. But I also really want to mention and amplify what you put on your last slide, Connor. We see towns across the state that are going through these kinds of things right now. It's not unique to us. And then you see neighbors fighting neighbors, and it is. We worry about this stuff. We lose sleep over this stuff. Like, how is this going to impact some of our vulnerable community members? Some people could afford, an increase. We've done a lot of work to try to put programs together to financially help our vulnerable community members. And then even shifted the tax rate, which you generally don't do unless you have like 20% business, because it doesn't make a huge impact. But we've done that the past 2 years also to try to balance out some of those bumps along the way. I think, the PACE committee is doing an amazing job with people that really hadn't been involved in any kind of municipal budgeting, and they're asking great questions. They really understand it. We wish there was a simple, like, did anybody think of this thing? And that was the thing that could have fixed it. But unfortunately, this isn't going to be a one-piece solution. I think it's going to require a little bit of all of the above to get there. I'm just concerned that even if we do end up needing an override and cutting, still making cuts, that we still have to look for 5 years forward. I don't want to go through all that just to get through 1 year and then we're back in that same position the following year. So I think that'll be something that we have to look at with PACE as well.
I think it's important for the community also to support the people on PACE who've been working so hard to try to take a look at what we do, where our revenue is, where our expenses are, what kinds of solutions we might have. Because they're members of this community. They're our friends and neighbors. I think it's important to support them and listen to what they have to say, because they're the ones who've been sitting for hours, as you said, 4 or 5 hours every meeting, twice a month to try to come up with some solutions. So I think it's really important that it's not just us as select board members or you as administrator making decisions. It's community members involved in that, and I think that's critical, really critical.
And we're trying to make the best recommendations that we can based on the data, the information that we garner, and what kind of impacts, because we're all taxpayers too. So this impacts us and our families as well.
And I think that's somehow the one thing I didn't fit in a 40-minute presentation was specifically acknowledging, I did acknowledge PACE, but the open house that they held, we talked about it under a different agenda item, but part of that recommendation as well was for PACE to hear from residents on what their values are and what they care about. And we had that open house on January 8th at Queesit, and we really didn't know what to expect because we took a kind of planning worldview on how you typically do like a community visioning session, and we did it with a budget, which was much more fun than you all sitting through 40 minutes of this. And we had a really, really good turnout. Yeah. Some of the rooms in Queesit House were standing room only, which was really, we really have our work cut out for us. But one of the people who was leaving that meeting, I think I know who it is, but I'm not going to say a name because I will 100% get it wrong and get myself in trouble. But somebody leaving that meeting said something to the effect of, this is really scary how big the challenge is, but it's up to us collectively. We get to decide on how are we going to go about getting through it.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean the choices are good or enjoyable, but this is ultimately going to be in front of town meeting.
Right.
That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I know you put a lot of work into that presentation,
Sure.
and it's a difficult one for sure.
And thank you, Wendy, for the work you do.
All right. So we're going to skip back to where we were and try to get through this quickly so Jen can get off the call. So next we have item 11, which is a contract award IT 2025-03 with Data Smith Network Solutions, Adlam Security Operations Platform Management.
That's Sure, thank you, Dottie. This and the next item are part of the town's ongoing efforts to ensure that our cybersecurity posture is reasonably and appropriately situated. One of the most important types of liability insurance we maintain is ransomware and cyber liability, and insurance companies are really drawing a line on what they expect to see organizations doing if they're going to continue to underwrite you. And so one of those things that came out of a network security assessment we did a couple years back was a recommendation that we go with 24/7 Security Operations Center. Those can be extraordinarily expensive, and so we just did not fund them for a couple of years. Mike's worked pretty hard and shopped around, and he found a company that is relatively local who offers this 24/7 365 service, which monitors attacks on the town's network for $33,326. Which was the lowest price he could find, and is substantially lower than some of the original prices we were quoted. It's for 1 year of service, and I recommend approval.
Okay, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions about this.
All right, you want to make a motion?
No
Craig?
All right. Jen, you have anything you want to say?
Oh, no, I said no questions.
Okay. So I move to approve contract IT 2025-03, Data Smith Network Solutions, add Lumen Security Operations Platform Management for 1 year, the value of $33,326.55.
Second,
So that's Bodger and Stacy, and a roll call vote starting with you, Jen.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes?
Barge, yes.
All right. Next, item 12, we have contract award IT 2025-04, Bulletproof Solutions Incorporated for 1.92 terabyte drives and support for a power store array.
Sure, thank you, Dottie. This contract is with Bulletproof, who's one of our managed IT service providers, to purchase and replace various drives for 2 existing Dell Power Store storage arrays that we have. The cost includes warranty, support, installation for both our primary server and a redundant server. The existing ones are at over 80% capacity. Anyone who goes on Amazon is going to say, I could find a terabyte SSD drive for much less money than this. That was actually the first thing I did. These are not consumer grade. These are enterprise grade. We have verified directly from Dell. These are meant to run 365 days a year, 24/7. They have a lot more throughput than a consumer grade. They also, at the end of the day, are proprietary size to fit into the Dell Power Store array, but they have the ability to stay on for a few fractions of a second in the event of a major power outage to back up anything that's going on so that you don't have catastrophic data loss. So this is on state contract, the state bid list. It's $32,888, and it's available out of a capital appropriation for IT infrastructure and cybersecurity improvements. We recommend approval.
Okay. You want to make a motion, Craig?
Sure, I don't understand this stuff, but I trust that you and Michael know what you're talking about. I move to approve IT 2025-04 Bulletproof Solutions for 1.92 terabyte drives and support for Power Store Array in the total amount of $32,888.
Second, Stacy.
That's Bodger and Stacy with a roll call vote.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes?
Barge, yes.
Excellent. All right. Next, Assistant Town Administration update. Easton Citizens Academy, spring 2025.
Can you hear me okay? Do I
I'll
sound-
just pass the mic.
Okay. There you go. Okay. Trish, yeah, I'll just hook her on. There we go. I'm fine with being. It's been a night, so we'll just go from here.
I wonder if the earthquake shook some of your equipment. That sounds like a good reason.
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying we're excited about having the 4th year of Citizens Academy, which, as I was writing it out, sounds really, really interesting because it just is such an impactful program. To see it 4 years in a row is really great. So we're going to be offering that 4th session in spring, starting on March 17th this year. I'm very thankful that Easton, I know a lot of communities do Citizens Academy. They see they see other communities like us that are doing them, and they want to start their own. And we've had inquiries from a couple of other communities in Massachusetts about how we do ours. But it's a testament to our department heads and the select board and Connor for supporting this type of a program. And I know the board might know what Citizens Academy is, but for the members of the public that are still watching, it's a 9-week program of classes, programs, and activities and tours designed to give residents a comprehensive look behind the scenes of what our staff do every day to provide the services that we use every day here in Easton. And what residents will learn in these range of sessions is for example, the town finance and administration, what it takes to manage over an $100 million budget, which in the context of tonight's budget discussion is particularly important. Public works and how they build and maintain over 130 miles of roads. Health and community services, who inspect all the food establishments that we love to enjoy in town, among a number of other important topics. Last year's cohort of residents were just as shocked as all the other ones have been at what it takes to go and run and operate a local government and make sure that everything that we take for granted that is used every day is made possible. That's like driving on our roads. You can't step out of your house without having touched a handful of things that are operated and maintained by our staff. Driving on our roads, turning on the shower and having clean water come out of it, having public safety available on the ready with a quick phone call, and all the planning that takes to be made possible doesn't just happen with a snap of the fingers. It takes a lot of planning and resources in advance. And our hope with this program is to educate participants on what our staff does every day, but also to encourage and inspire them to be involved. As you can see, committees like PACE and other in the select board, there are a lot of volunteers that do tireless work to be able to make our community run. And so being able to use this as a tool to break down those barriers and show what it takes to be able to run town government is a really important way of getting these folks involved and giving them the tools that they need to be able to feel comfortable to participate in the process. And I'm particularly proud of the cohort that went through last year because there were a handful of members that have gone on to serve on important appointed roles, including PACE and the Tax Aid Committee. So we're very proud to see that. There are other members in past cohorts that have gone on to serve in elected roles as well. And that's exactly what you would hope to see when you have residents go through these programs. We hope to generate a lot of interest, so I'm sure whenever you get a chance, if you can tell someone that you think might be interested, help spread the word. But it is on our website and our social media. It'll be on our town crier for a couple of weeks, and we'll try to share it through other channels to make sure that people know that they can participate. It's over 9 weeks, as I said, starting on March 17th. The final exam of sorts is town meeting on May 19th. And the idea there is to be able to go through all the different town departments and have the culmination be what it takes and the things that are covered in town meeting at the end. There's no true exam, it's just show up and participate. And then it's followed by a graduation at the following select board meeting, which will be June 2nd. All the important dates and the application form are available on our website, easton.ma.us/Citizens Academy, but those links are also available from the homepage of our website. The application deadline is Friday, February 28th, so we can make sure that we can plan the logistics of all of our members in the cohort. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any, but I'm just very excited and hope that we get a good turnout this year.
That's great. It's very exciting for us on the graduation day when people come to the select board meeting and talk about what they learned or what they were surprised at or what they were impressed with. And it's always people are very enthusiastic about it, and it's a real value to people that go through that process.
Great.
It really builds community involvement because, as you mentioned, I know very well a person who was on the last cohort and is now on the Taxation Aid Committee because he found something that really spoke to him. I'm really very pleased that he did that, and I'm pleased that everybody that I've talked to who's been in that last cohort had nothing but positive things to say about it.
I think that's the thing is that folks, when they go through the program, they realize, they say, oh, I don't know government. I don't know how I would fit into this. But once you go through it, you see that there are so many different areas of expertise that they could weigh in. And once they feel empowered and can participate, it's really great. And it's great to see folks like that just going into the tax aid committee or on PACE and just diving in. And I think part of it's also just knowing who the staff are and being able to connect with other people when you do have questions. So it's overall a really great program to build community support.
Well, it's a big time commitment for you too, Sean, so I really appreciate you leading that.
It's one of my favorite things, though, so it makes it a little bit easier.
Awesome.
Good for you.
All right, next we need to vote to open the annual town meeting warrant for May 19th, 2025.
Yes, it is that time of year. We would ask that the board vote to open the warrant for the submission of articles for the May 19th annual town meeting. I would propose the board vote to open the warrant for the town meeting with a closing date of Monday, February 24th. For the submission of articles to our office as is practice.
Connor, I'm having trouble picking up your audio.
Sorry.
He forgot to put the microphone back on.
Round 7. Thank you.
I tried, then it just got too much.
Annual town meeting is the third Monday in May every year by charter. This year that's May 19th. So it's time to get moving on the warrant process. I'd ask the board to open the warrant to accept articles until Monday, February 24th. As is practice, if the board takes this vote, we'll send a memo notifying department heads and board and committee chairs tomorrow.
All right.
I move to open the annual town meeting warrant for our May 19th, 2025 town meeting with a closing date of February 24th, 2025 at 4:30 p.m. for submission of warrant articles.
Second, Stacy.
So that's Bodger and Stacy, and a roll call vote, Jen?
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes?
Barger, yes.
All right. Next, we have the acceptance and minutes of January 13th, 2025.
So moved, Barger.
Second, Stacy.
That's Bodger and Stacy.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes?
Barger, yes.
Excellent. Town administrator notes.
I have done.
Select board notes.
I have none.
I just want to say that Connor and Sean and I went to the Mass Municipal Annual Meeting, which this year was called Connect 351. We had department heads there as well, but Easton had a very strong showing. And I want to congratulate Sean, who was one of the moderators or panelists? Both for communications. Sean is very well known across the industry as a communications specialist, which is one of the things that we were really found appealing when we met him in his interview. And not only did you join that panel, but you've also done numerous webinars and the go-to person and started the communications division of the Mass Municipal Association, which is a huge deal. And I want to just say thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, well, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Barger.
Second, Stacy.
That's Bodger and Stacy, and roll call vote to get to adjourn.
Stacy, yes.
Full Janetti, yes.
Barger, yes.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for hanging in there, Jen. And thank you, ECAT, for helping us navigate through our technical difficulties tonight. You did an awesome job.